On the night of September 29, 1913, one of the most famous inventors in the world boarded a steamship in Antwerp, Belgium. He was traveling to London for a business meeting, a routine journey he had made many times before. He ate dinner with colleagues, retired to his cabin at 10 o'clock, and left instructions to be awakened at 6:15 the next morning. He was never seen alive again. His bed had not been slept in. His nightshirt was neatly laid out. His watch was positioned where he could see it from the bed. His hat and overcoat were found folded beneath the afterdeck railing. 10 days later, a decomposing body was pulled from the North Sea, identified only by personal effects: a pill case, a wallet, an eyeglass case. The man who vanished that night was Rudolf Diesel, inventor of the engine that bears his name. At the time of his death, newspapers from New York to Moscow ran front-page stories. Conspiracy theories erupted immediately. Was it suicide? Murder by German agents? Assassination by oil industry tycoons? The mystery has never been solved. But the greater mystery may be what Rudolf Diesel intended his invention to become, and how far it strayed from his original vision. Because the man who invented the diesel engine didn't design it to run on petroleum. He designed it to run on vegetable oil. He envisioned it as a tool to liberate farmers and small communities from dependence on coal and oil barons. He saw it as a pathway to energy independence, sustainability, and social equality. More than a century later, as the world grapples with climate change and searches for renewable fuels, Rudolf Diesel's original vision has never been more relevant. This is the story of a brilliant engineer, a revolutionary invention, and a death that remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries. Rudolf Christian Karl Diesel was born on March 18, 1858, in Paris, France, though he would never truly belong to the country of his birth. His parents, Theodor and Elise Diesel, were Bavarian immigrants who had left their hometown of Augsburg a decade earlier. Theodor was a bookbinder who had reinvented himself as a leather goods manufacturer in the French capital. Elise was the daughter of a Nuremberg merchant. The family lived modestly in working-class Paris, surrounded by the mechanical wonders of the industrial age. Young Rudolf was fascinated by machines from his earliest years. He spent hours at a museum of technology and invention that showcased the engines and devices transforming the 19th century. While other children played in the streets, Rudolf studied gears and pistons, trying to understand how things worked. In 1867, when Rudolf was 9 years old, he attended the Paris World's Fair. There, he encountered an invention that would shape his entire life: the internal combustion engine designed by Nikolaus Otto. Unlike the massive steam engines that powered factories, Otto's engine was relatively compact and ran on coal gas. Rudolf was transfixed. Here was a new way to convert fuel into motion, and even at 9 years old, he sensed that it was just the beginning, but Rudolf's comfortable childhood was about to be shattered. In 1870, the Franco-Prussian War erupted between France and the German states. For the Diesel family, the consequences were immediate and devastating. As German nationals living in France, they were classified as enemy aliens and expelled from the country. The family fled to London, arriving as refugees with little money and few prospects. The poverty was crushing. Theodor struggled to find work. The family survived on what little they could earn and the charity of others. Rudolf, now 12 years old, experienced for the first time the grinding reality of having nothing, a memory that would later fuel his vision of technology as a force for social equality. But Rudolf's parents made a decision that would change his life. They sent him alone to Augsburg, Germany, to live with his aunt and uncle. There, he could learn German, receive a proper education, and escape the poverty of the London exile. It was a wrenching separation. Rudolf would not see his parents for years, but in Augsburg he would find his calling. Rudolf's uncle, Christoph Barnacle, taught mathematics at the Royal County Vocational College in Augsburg. Under his guidance, Rudolf threw himself into his studies with an intensity that startled his teachers. He excelled in mathematics and science, graduating at the top of his class. At 14, Rudolf wrote to his parents with a declaration that would prove prophetic. He intended to become an engineer. In 1873, Rudolf enrolled at the Industrial School of Augsburg. 2 years later, he won a merit scholarship to the Royal Bavarian Polytechnic of Munich, one of the finest technical universities in Germany. His parents, still struggling financially in London, urged him to decline the scholarship and find work instead. Rudolf refused. He knew that education was his path forward. At Munich, Rudolf encountered the professor who would shape his intellectual life, Carl von Linde, a pioneer in refrigeration technology and an expert in thermodynamics. In Linde's lectures, Rudolf learned about the Carnot cycle, the theoretical framework that describes the maximum possible efficiency of any heat engine. The Carnot cycle was a revelation. It showed that existing engines, even the best steam engines of the era, were converting barely 10% of their fuel's energy into useful work. 90% was being wasted as heat. Rudolf became obsessed with a question: could he design an engine that approached the theoretical maximum efficiency? Could he close the gap between what was possible and what engineers had actually achieved? It was a question that would consume the next 2 decades of his life. To understand Rudolf Diesel's achievement, you must understand what he was chasing: the perfect engine. The Carnot cycle, described by French engineer Sadi Carnot in 1824, represents the theoretical upper limit of efficiency for any engine that converts heat into work. In an ideal Carnot engine, heat is added at constant temperature, expanded to produce work, then expelled at a lower constant temperature. No real engine can achieve Carnot efficiency. The laws of thermodynamics forbid it, but the closer an engine comes, the less fuel it wastes. Steam engines of Diesel's era operated at roughly 10% efficiency. The internal combustion engines being developed by inventors like Otto and Daimler were better, but still wasted enormous amounts of energy. Rudolf believed he could do far better. After graduating from Munich with highest honors in 1880, Diesel went to work for his former professor, Carl von Linde, in Paris. Linde had founded a company to manufacture refrigeration equipment, cutting-edge technology in an era before electric refrigerators. Diesel helped design and build ice plants, eventually becoming director of the Paris facility. But even as he worked on refrigeration, Diesel's mind kept returning to engines. In his spare time, he experimented with new designs. He explored the use of ammonia vapor as a working fluid. He studied the properties of different fuels. He filled notebooks with calculations and sketches. One experiment nearly killed him. Testing a high-compression ammonia engine, the device exploded, leaving Diesel hospitalized for months with injuries that would affect his health for the rest of his life. A lesser man might have abandoned his dangerous hobby. Diesel pressed on. In 1890, Diesel moved to Berlin to manage Linde's corporate research and development department. It was there, drawing on years of study and experimentation, that he finally conceived the engine that would bear his name. The insight was elegant. In existing internal combustion engines, fuel and air were mixed together and then ignited by a spark. This limited how much the mixture could be compressed before ignition. Compress it too much, and it would explode prematurely. The compression ratio was limited, and with it, the efficiency. Diesel proposed a different approach. Instead of mixing fuel and air before compression, he would compress pure air to an extremely high pressure. This compression would heat the air to temperatures above the ignition point of the fuel. Then, and only then, he would inject the fuel directly into the superheated air. The fuel would ignite spontaneously, without any spark, and the expansion would drive the piston. By separating compression from combustion, Diesel could achieve much higher compression ratios and therefore much higher efficiency. He calculated that his engine could convert 75% of fuel energy into work, compared to 10% for steam engines. Even accounting for real-world losses, the improvement would be revolutionary. In 1892, Diesel filed for a German patent. In 1893, he published his theoretical treatise, Theory and Construction of a Rational Heat Engine to Replace the Steam Engine and the Combustion Engines Known Today. The title was ambitious, so was the engineer. Having an idea is one thing, making it work is another. Rudolf Diesel secured support from 2 industrial giants, Maschinenfabrik Augsburg, later MAN, and the Krupp Steel Works. From 1893 to 1897, he worked to transform his theoretical engine into a functioning machine. The process was agonizing. The pressures involved were far higher than any engine had achieved before. Components failed. Seals leaked. Fuel injection proved fiendishly difficult to control. Diesel suffered from headaches, depression, and the lingering effects of his earlier explosion injury. The first prototype, completed in 1893, barely ran at all. It produced power for only a few minutes before breaking down. Critics mocked the rational heat engine as an impractical fantasy. But Diesel persevered. He refined the design, improved the materials, solved the injection problems one by one. By 1897, he had a working engine, a 25-horsepower, four-stroke, single-cylinder machine that achieved the unheard-of thermal efficiency of 26%, later improved to over 30%. To put that in perspective, Diesel's engine was 3 times more efficient than the best steam engines of its era. It could do the same work with 1/3 the fuel. In an age when fuel costs were a major expense for factories, ships, and railroads, the implications were staggering. The first successful engine was tested in Augsburg on February 17, 1897. Rudolf Diesel, after 13 years of work, had proven that his rational heat engine was not a fantasy. It was the future. Success brought wealth beyond anything Diesel had known. Manufacturers across Europe and America licensed his patent. Royalty fees poured in. The poverty-stricken refugee boy who had been sent alone to Augsburg at age 12 was now a millionaire. Thomas Edison, the most famous inventor in America, called the diesel engine one of the great achievements of mankind. Winston Churchill, then a rising political figure with a keen interest in naval technology, declared a new class of diesel-powered ships to be the most perfect maritime masterpiece of the century. The diesel engine transformed industry after industry. It powered factories without the need for coal-fired boilers. It propelled ships across oceans with unprecedented efficiency. It drove generators that produced electricity. The engine's compact size and high efficiency made it suitable for applications where steam engines were too bulky or too wasteful. By the early 1900s, Rudolf Diesel was one of the most celebrated inventors in the world. His name appeared in newspapers alongside Edison and Bell. His engine was changing the shape of modern civilization. But Diesel had a vision for his invention that went far beyond industrial applications, a vision that would prove more radical than anyone expected. Rudolf Diesel never intended his engine to run on petroleum. In his original patent and in his published writings, Diesel emphasized that his engine could operate on virtually any combustible fuel, including vegetable oils. At the 1900 Paris World's Fair, he demonstrated a diesel engine running on peanut oil, proving that plant-based fuels could power the machines of the industrial age. This was not a minor technical footnote. It was central to Diesel's vision of what his invention could achieve. The use of vegetable oils for engine fuels may seem insignificant today. Diesel wrote, but such oils may become in course of time as important as petroleum and the coal tar products of the present time. Consider what this meant. In 1900, petroleum was controlled by a handful of powerful corporations, most notably John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. Coal was dominated by similar industrial interests. If you wanted to power a factory or run a vehicle, you were dependent on these concentrated sources of fuel. But vegetable oil could be produced anywhere crops could grow. Farmers could press oil from their own harvests. Communities could achieve energy independence. The power to generate mechanical force could be decentralized, democratized, placed in the hands of ordinary people rather than industrial tycoons. Diesel saw his engine as a tool for social equality. He believed that efficient, locally fueled engines could lift up rural communities, reduce the burden of manual labor, and break the stranglehold of centralized energy monopolies. He was, in effect, a renewable energy visionary a century before the concept became mainstream. Why didn't Diesel's vegetable oil vision become reality? The answer lies in economics and timing. When Diesel's engine reached the market, petroleum was cheap and abundant. Oil companies had invested heavily in refining infrastructure. A new product, diesel fuel, derived from crude oil, was developed specifically for diesel engines. It was cheaper than vegetable oil, more readily available in industrial quantities, and easier to standardize. The engine that was designed to free humanity from dependence on fossil fuels became instead one of the largest consumers of petroleum products. The irony was not lost on Diesel, who continued to advocate for renewable fuels even as the oil industry embraced his invention. Today, more than a century later, Diesel's vegetable oil vision has finally found its moment. Biodiesel, fuel made from vegetable oils, animal fats, and recycled cooking grease, is a growing industry. The engines that power trucks, ships, and generators can run on renewable fuels just as diesel always intended. Climate change has made the case for plant-based fuels more urgent than ever. Rudolf Diesel was right. He was just 100 years ahead of his time. By 1913, Rudolf Diesel's life had become complicated. His health had never fully recovered from the explosion decades earlier. He suffered from headaches and periods of depression. His business affairs, once so promising, had become troubled. Despite the enormous success of his engine, Diesel had proven better at inventing than investing. Bad financial decisions had depleted his fortune. He was, by some accounts, on the verge of bankruptcy. There were also tensions around his invention. The diesel engine had become crucial for military applications, particularly submarines. With war looming in Europe, navies on all sides wanted access to the technology. The German military had expected Diesel to grant them exclusive rights. He had refused, preferring to license his patent to customers in multiple countries. On September 29, 1913, Diesel boarded the steamship Dresden in Antwerp, bound for England. He was scheduled to attend a meeting of the Consolidated Diesel Manufacturing Company in London. He was also rumored to be planning discussions with the British Royal Navy about powering their submarines with diesel engines. Before leaving, Diesel gave his wife Martha a bag with instructions not to open it for a week. He ate dinner aboard the ship with 2 colleagues. At about 10 o'clock, he retired to his cabin, leaving instructions to be called at 6:15 the next morning. When the steward arrived at his door the next morning, there was no answer. The cabin was empty. The bed was untouched, his nightshirt laid out, his watch positioned to be visible from the pillow. Beneath the afterdeck railing, searchers found his hat and his neatly folded overcoat. Rudolf Diesel had vanished. 10 days later, on October 10, the crew of the Dutch pilot boat Koertzen spotted a body floating in the North Sea near the mouth of the Eastern Scheldt. The corpse was badly decomposed, too deteriorated to bring aboard in the rough weather. The sailors retrieved personal items from the clothing: a pill case, a wallet, an ID card, a pocket knife, an eyeglass case. They returned the body to the sea. On October 13, Rudolf Diesel's son Eugen identified these items as belonging to his father. When Martha Diesel finally opened the bag her husband had given her, she found 20,000 German marks in cash, roughly $120,000 in today's money, and financial statements showing that their bank accounts were nearly empty. In Diesel's diary, found in his cabin, the page for September 29 was marked with a cross. Some interpreted this as a sign he had planned his own death. The official ruling was suicide. Diesel had financial troubles, health problems, and a history of depression. The evidence, the cross in the diary, the empty bank accounts, the neatly arranged cabin, suggested a man putting his affairs in order before taking his own life. But almost immediately, conspiracy theories emerged. One theory pointed to the German government. Kaiser Wilhelm II was furious that Diesel had refused to grant Germany exclusive access to his engine technology, especially with war approaching. Was Diesel murdered by German agents to prevent him from sharing his expertise with the British? Another theory implicated the oil industry. John D. Rockefeller and other petroleum tycoons had reason to fear Diesel's advocacy for vegetable oil fuels. If his renewable fuel vision gained traction, it could threaten their empires. Was Diesel assassinated by agents of big oil? A third, more exotic theory suggested that Diesel's death was staged, that British intelligence had faked his disappearance to cover his defection to the British cause. According to this theory, Diesel secretly went to Canada, worked for the Vickers shipyard in Montreal, and helped accelerate British submarine development. The truth is that we will never know for certain what happened on the Dresden that night. Rudolf Diesel's death remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries. Whatever the circumstances of his death, Rudolf Diesel's invention transformed civilization. Today, diesel engines power approximately 35% of the world's automobiles, and that percentage is far higher for trucks, buses, ships, and heavy machinery. Almost every semi-truck on the highway, almost every cargo ship crossing the ocean, almost every locomotive pulling freight runs on diesel power. The efficiency that diesel chased his entire life has continued to improve. Modern diesel engines achieve thermal efficiencies above 50%, far beyond what diesel achieved in 1897, but following directly from his principles. The compression ignition technology he pioneered remains fundamentally unchanged. Compress air, inject fuel, let the heat of compression ignite the mixture. Diesel engines generate electricity in power plants around the world. They pump water and run industrial machinery. They power military vehicles, agricultural equipment, and construction machines. The modern global economy runs, quite literally, on Rudolf Diesel's invention. And what of Diesel's original vision? The engine that could run on vegetable oil, that could free communities from dependence on fossil fuels? That vision is finally being realized. Biodiesel, made from vegetable oils and animal fats, is now a billion-gallon industry. Modern biodiesel can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50–80% compared to petroleum diesel. It can be made from waste cooking oil, agricultural byproducts, and purpose-grown energy crops. The irony is profound. After a century, in which diesel engines became synonymous with petroleum consumption and air pollution, Rudolf Diesel's original concept, clean burning, renewable, locally produced fuel, may be the key to addressing climate change. The use of vegetable oils for engine fuels may seem insignificant today, Diesel wrote in 1912, but such oils may become in course of time as important as petroleum. He was right. It just took longer than he expected. Rudolf Diesel was more than an engineer. He was a social theorist who believed technology could be a force for equality. He was a visionary who foresaw the importance of renewable energy a century before the concept entered mainstream consciousness. He was a brilliant mind who pushed the boundaries of thermodynamics and mechanical engineering. He was also a man haunted by financial troubles, health problems, and the gap between his idealistic vision and the commercial reality of his invention. He watched as the engine he designed to run on vegetable oil became one of the world's largest consumers of petroleum. He saw the technology he created to empower ordinary people become instead a tool of industrial and military power. And then, on a September night in 1913, he vanished, taking his secrets with him. Today, his name is everywhere. Every time you hear the rumble of a truck engine, every time a ship's horn sounds in a harbor, every time a generator powers up in an emergency, Rudolf Diesel's legacy is at work. The shy, brilliant boy who studied engines at the Paris World's Fair changed the world and left behind a mystery that may never be solved.